Maria Eleonora of Brandenburg. On the 25th of November 1620, Eleonora married Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden. In 1626, Eleonora was pregnant for a fourth time. None of her previous children had survived. On the 7th of December, a baby was born with a fleece, lanugo, which is a very thin, soft, downy hair that is sometimes found on the body of a newborn human. It is normally shed before birth. It enveloped the child from its head to its knees, leaving only its face and arms and lower part of its legs free. The baby also had an extremely large nose that was also covered with hair. It was assumed the baby was a boy, and the king was told. Closer inspection, however, determined that the baby was a girl. Gustavus Adolphus's half-sister Catherine informed him that the child was a girl. She carried the baby in her arms to the king in a condition for him to see and know and realise for himself. He remarked, "She is going to be clever, for she has taken us all in." His disappointment did not last long, and he decided that she would be called Christina after his mother. When the queen was presented with the child, she screamed, "Instead of a son, I am given a daughter, dark and ugly, with such a great nose and black eyes. Take her from me, I will not have such a monster." She may have suffered from postnatal depression. In her agitated state, the queen tried to injure the child. In Christina's early childhood, she repeatedly met with accidents. Once a beam fell mysteriously upon the cradle. Another time she fell from a flight of stairs, apparently by accident. On another occasion, the nursemaid was blamed for dropping the baby onto a stone floor, injuring her shoulder that ever afterwards remained a little crooked. In the year after Christina's birth, Maria Eleonora was described as being in a state of hysteria. In 1632, Gustavus Adolphus described his wife as being a very sick woman. In 1636, Maria Eleonora was taken to Gripsholm Castle, and she officially lost her parental rights to her daughter. In 1633, her husband died in battle. Maria Eleonora returned to Sweden with the embalmed body of her husband. For more than a year, Maria Eleonora condemned Christina to a mourning seclusion in rooms from which every ray of light was excluded and lit by candles day and night. She also made her daughter sleep with her in a bed over which her father's heart was hung in a golden casket. King Charles VI of France. Charles thought that he was made of glass and thus tried to protect himself in various ways so that he would not break. He reportedly had iron rods sewn into his clothes so that he would not shatter if he came into contact with another person. He gave up on his personal hygiene to the point that he had to be cut out of his clothes. This condition has come to be known as glass delusion. Ivan the Terrible. After his wife's death, Ivan sank into a depression that inspired a 24-year-long reign of terror. After he seized absolute control, Ivan murdered any noble who spoke against him. He beat his daughter-in-law so bad that she miscarried, and murdered his son in one of his rages. He blinded the architect of St. Basil's Cathedral so that he could never create another building as beautiful. Emperor Justin II. Justin II was ruler of the Byzantine Empire from 565 to 578 AD, and over that time he would often try to bite others in the court and demand that organ music be constantly played to settle his nerves. Members of his court tried desperately to divert his attention. They had to hold him down during fits of violent rages and installed bars on windows to prevent him from jumping out. He would laugh, cry, make animal noises and hit people without provocation. People began to believe that he was possessed by the devil. Through it all, his wife, Empress Sophia, took care of him and even made political decisions on his behalf. Juana of Castile. As a young woman, she was known to be highly intelligent. It was only after her marriage that she seemed to change. Juana earned her title, Juana la Loco, for her obsession with her husband. After his sudden death in 1506, she refused to be separated from Philip's dead, embalmed body. She kept it in her room, slept in the same bed as him, and travelled with him. Wherever she went, her husband's rotting body was at her side. On one occasion, she had the coffin opened and began kissing and sucking the corpse's feet. She had to be forcibly removed, kicking and screaming. Princess Alexandra of Bavaria. Alexandra suffered from a number of psychological eccentricities, including an extreme fixation with cleanliness, as well as wearing only white clothes. In her early 20s, she notably developed a delusion that as a child she had swallowed a grand piano made of glass, which remained inside her. She thought that any sudden movement would shatter the instrument. She would walk sideways in corridors and doorways to avoid breaking. Christian VII of Denmark. In 1766, Christian VII of Denmark became king at the age of 16 and seemed never to act a day older for the rest of his life. According to his doctors, his frequent masturbation bordered on unhealthy. He even did it while on the throne in front of his court. He played pranks on his grandmother, putting pins in her throne and throwing things at her. He ran wild through the streets with his friend and mistress, destroying shops and patronising brothels. He built his own torture rack and had himself tied to it and flogged. He often leapfrogged dignitaries when they bowed to him. As he regressed further and further, his doctor Johann Frederick saw a chance to swoop in and gain power. He had himself appointed to Christian's cabinet and seduced Christian's wife, Caroline Matilda of Great Britain. He maintained his spot as de facto ruler until Christian's equally manipulative stepmother persuaded a very weak-minded Christian to have Johann Frederick and the Queen arrested for treason. Abraham I of the Ottoman Empire. Abraham became Sultan of the Ottoman Empire after the death of his brother in 1640. From the start, he showed himself to be an inept ruler. Depressed over his brother's death, he distracted himself with the pleasures of his harem of 280 concubines. His mother took full advantage of his inattentiveness and ruled in his stead until he had her banished. His most infamous moment of madness came when he had his entire harem of 280 concubines drowned. It was the high taxes he imposed to keep himself fat and happy that ultimately led to his downfall. His decadent tastes had a direct impact on the economy of the empire. He drank amber in a cup of steaming coffee so frequently he drove up the price of amber. He loved sable furs so much he ordered hundreds of furs to carpet his home, and he had his cats shaved, insisting they should wear capes of sable. His obsession increased the price of sable 20 times over. His people imprisoned him and installed his 6-year-old son as Sultan, all with the support of his mother, and in the end he was strangled by his own former executioner. Eric XIV of Sweden. Eric, who once courted Elizabeth I of England, was a charming, handsome and capable king. He ascended to the throne in 1560 and spent a large portion of his early kingship in a battle for control with his brother. As time went on, paranoia started taking over and his mind began to fade. Eric began to have vicious mood swings and unhinged impulses started to take over. He sentenced guards to death for irritating him and executed people for whispering or giggling in his presence. Convinced that everyone was plotting against him, servants who raised their eyes were put to death for trying to seduce the ladies of the court. His rage eventually boiled over when he killed a Swedish nobleman with his own hands by stabbing him to death. Then he had his guards execute a number of other aristocrats who were held in his castle cells or there as guests. Henry VI of England. When Henry fell into his completely unresponsive state in 1453, his wife was pregnant. When his son Edward was born, the king didn't seem to notice much at all. When his son was shown to him, he glanced at him and then just looked away. He often needed to be reminded that he actually had a son. When affected, he wasn't able to move his limbs or even hold his own head up, staying in a slouched position when unsupported, sometimes unable to properly communicate or show awareness of events around him. He didn't seem to have any sense of time or memory at all. After being incapacitated by his illness since August of 1453, Henry suddenly became lucid again on Christmas Day 1455. He would later fall ill again. During the Second Battle of St. Albans, he was seen laughing and singing manically while swinging his sword. King Louis XIV of France. Like many other noblemen in his day, Louis used enemas, believing they contributed to good health. However, Louis may have taken the colon cleansing a little further than his peers. He demanded at least 4 enemas throughout the course of a single day. The water in the enemas was infused with colour and scented with rose, bergamot and angelica. Empress Elizabeth or Sissy of Austria. She was obsessively concerned with maintaining her youthful figure and beauty. She maintained her weight at approximately 7 stone, which is 110 pounds or 50 kilograms, for the rest of her life. Whenever her weight threatened to exceed 7 stone, a fasting cure or hunger cure would follow, which involved almost complete fasting. Meat itself often filled her with disgust, so she either had the juice of half raw beefsteak squeezed or else adhered to a diet of milk and eggs. She emphasized her extreme slenderness through the practice of tight lacing. She reduced her waist to 40 centimetres, which is 16 inches. Corsets of the time were split busk types, fastening up the front with hooks and eyes, but Elizabeth had more rigid, solid front ones made out of leather like those of Parisian courtesans, probably to hold up under the stress of such strenuous lacing. The fact that she only wore them for a few weeks may indicate that even leather proved inadequate for her needs. The Empress developed extremely rigorous and disciplined exercise habits. Every castle she lived in was equipped with a gymnasium. Mats and balance beams were installed in her bedchamber so that she could practice on them each morning. She had gigantic mirrors installed so she could correct every single movement and position. She took up fencing in her 50s with equal discipline. A fervent horsewoman, she rode every day for hours on end, becoming probably the world's best, as well as best known female equestrian at the time. When due to her sciatica and arthritis, she could no longer endure long hours in the saddle, she substituted walking, subjecting her attendants to marches and hiking tours in all weathers. Daily care of her abundant and extremely long hair, which turned from the dark blonde of her youth to a chestnut, took at least 3 hours every day. Her hairdresser, Fanny, was forbidden to wear rings and required to wear white gloves. After hours of dressing, braiding and pinning up the Empress's tresses, the hair that fell out had to be presented in a silver bowl to the reproachful Empress for inspection. Fanny secreted the combed-out hairs under her apron on a piece of adhesive tape and could show the Empress a clean comb. Her hair was washed with eggs and cognac once every 2 weeks. All activities were cancelled for that day. Elizabeth tested countless beauty products prepared in the court pharmacy or by a lady-in-waiting. She appeared to favour a compound of white wax, spearmint, sweet almond oil and rosewater for her face. She slept without a pillow on a metal bedstead, which she believed was better for retaining and maintaining her upright posture. Raw veal or crushed strawberries lined her nightly leather facial mask. She was also heavily massaged and often slept with cloths soaked in violet or cider vinegar above her hips to preserve her slim waist. Her neck was wrapped with cloths soaked in toned washing water to further preserve her skin tone. She took both a cold shower every morning and an olive oil bath in the evening. Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon carried licorice with him wherever he went. He used it for pleasure as well as treatment for a wide variety of ailments including colds, indigestion, coughs and infection. Napoleon only drank water that had been steeped with licorice. He ate so much that his teeth became stained black. Herod the Great. He wasn't actually born a Judean or a royal, but married into it. His wife, Mary Army, regularly made him jealous. So thanks to some conspiring from his own family, Herod had her killed. Horrifyingly, he couldn't let her go after her death. He kept her in a vat of honey, and once a week for 7 years he was, how can I phrase this, intimate with her. Emperor Nero. Suetonius wrote in the 12 Caesars that, like a wild creature himself, Nero was released from a cage dressed in the skins of wild animals, and he attacked the private parts of men and women who stood bound to stakes. The British royal family. It's hard to believe now, but as little as 300 years ago, British royals routinely consumed human flesh and organs for medical purposes. According to research, this practice may have persisted to as late as the beginning of the 19th century. Blood, brains, hearts, livers, and even eyes were on the menu. The parts were often taken from dead soldiers and prisoners. Some monarchs even opted to extract the body parts directly from the corpses themselves, to ensure they were as fresh as possible. Princess Märtha Louise of Norway. A lot of people think they have a bond with their pets where the dog or cat can understand what they're saying, and vice versa. But most of us understand we aren't literally talking to them with our minds. Not Princess Märtha Louise. She rode horses when she was young and discovered she could communicate with them. This led to her talking to all animals. Somehow the horses also taught her how to speak to angels, and this became her life's work. She has written at least 2 books on the celestial beings and has announced plans to open an angel school. Maha bint Mohammed bin Ahmad al-Sudari. Despite belonging to the house which runs Saudi Arabia and is one of the richest families in the world, Princess Maha doesn't like paying for things. When she's given a bill, she will shout, scream, break things and threaten self-harm. During her 2009 Paris stay, she managed to grab £20 million worth of swag from 30 stores and didn't pay. Her tactic was to hand the merchant a fancy looking document saying, "I owe you," and then just never settling it. Because of this, King Abdullah had her confined to the palace for 4 months when she returned to Saudi Arabia. In 2012, she had been staying at Paris's 5-star Shangri-La hotel for 5 months, taking up 41 rooms. The bill came to more than £7 million, but she had no intention of paying. Instead, she and her 60-strong entourage tried to sneak out at 3:30 a.m, but it's hard to go unnoticed when you have a fleet of limos and a mountain of luggage. When she was barred from leaving until the bill was paid, she lay on the floor and threw a tantrum. Amazingly, after some diplomats got involved, she was allowed to leave without paying. Charles, Prince of Wales. One thing that happens when you're royal is you get used to a certain level of luxury. The problem is most other houses and hotels don't live up to that standard. When travelling, he brings his favourite mattress with him. He also takes his own special toilet seat and premium toilet paper. Since he changes his clothes up to 5 times a day, he brings a chest of drawers to hold his wardrobe. He likes looking at 2 pictures of the Scottish Highlands, so he takes those along too. He admits to talking to plants every day. He even employs retired Indian servicemen to handpick slugs off his plants at night in the garden at Highgrove. Camilla heard a shriek coming from the kitchen one night after the prince stumbled upon a mystery plastic wrap covering food while searching for a late-night snack. Fearing the worst, Camilla dashed in after him. "What's this?" he asked, pointing at the food. "It's clingfilm, darling," she replied. Queen Mary of Tech. She was a kleptomaniac. Her technique went something like this. She'd pop by your house and see something she liked. Instead of making conversation like a normal person who had came to visit, she would stare in silence at whatever she wanted. This was the first warning sign. She would sigh and loudly say something like, "I am caressing it with my eyes." Since this was the Queen telling you, you'd probably give in and offer whatever it was she was looking at as a present. But what if it was a family heirloom or something you just couldn't bear to part with? Then she would take it without you noticing. When people realised what she was doing, they took to hiding anything they thought she might take a shine to. She countered this by showing up unannounced. Queen Mary was known to stop by antique dealers and take whatever she wanted and then forget to pay. Eventually her stealing got so bad her assistants had to be on high alert, and if they found out later she'd managed to sneak something into her handbag, it was returned with a note saying there had been a misunderstanding. Queen Nzinga of Ndango and Matamba. She had a harem of men she made dress like women, while she dressed as a man. She would have 2 men fight to the death every night and bed the winner. The next day she would also execute the winner. At 75 years old, she had all of her harem killed, except for one, a 16-year-old boy who she married. Farouk of Egypt. During formal meals, he would throw stuff at the dignitaries and yell whenever he hit them. When he was out driving, he liked honking his specially made horn that sounded like a dog being run over. He once appointed someone Minister of Justice because he liked his moustache. He decided he wasn't a fan of the railway station that he used twice a year and had the old one demolished and a new one built. After having a nightmare about being chased by lions, he went to the local zoo and shot the 2 lions there. He had been taught how to pickpocket by a master thief. He once stole Winston Churchill's pocket watch, and when the theft was discovered, he pretended that he'd found it. Frederick Wilhelm I of Prussia. Frederick had an obsession with developing his own personal regiment of unusually tall soldiers. They were known as the Potsdam Giants. There was only one criteria that needed to be met in order to join the ranks of the Giants. You needed to be at least 6 feet tall. Some soldiers volunteered to be part of the regiment, but Frederick Wilhelm had other means of recruiting. He would often pay men for their tallest sons and farmhands. Leaders from other countries would even send him their tallest men in order to foster civil relations. Frederick Wilhelm attempted to make these soldiers even taller by stretching them on the rack, which often led to the soldiers being severely injured or killed. Elagabalus, Emperor of Rome. He released poisonous snakes into the audience of the gladiator games and watched as crowds panicked and died from poisonous bites. He tied dinner guests to a water wheel to watch them slowly drown. He let loose lions and leopards during a feast. When his chief advisor warned him that he should live a moderate life to prevent revolt over the effects of his taxation, he stabbed the advisor to death. He literally smothered visitors with flowers. And he did all this and more before he died at the age of 18. Peter III of Russia. When Peter married Catherine at 17, it was clear from the start they were a bad match. Rather than consummate their relationship, Peter was more content to play toy soldiers in bed and make his wife dress up in a military outfit to run drills. He was also a mean-spirited drunk who in the middle of a banquet said the reason he would not touch Catherine was because she was a stupid girl whore. When a rat bit the head off one of Peter's beloved toy soldiers, he gave the rat a proper court-martial and trial before he had the vermin hung from tiny gallows he constructed. Sado, Crown Prince of Korea. Born in 1735, Prince Sado's brutal treatment at the hands of his father led to a life of perversion, violence and despair. Sado suffered from delusions and nightmares from the age of 10, and things got worse as he grew up. His constant quest to impress his father drove him to madness, especially considering his father may have been equally so, and hell-bent on torturing his son. Sado indulged in his vices liberally, but always hid them from his father. He was obsessed with clothes and threw alcohol-fueled orgies, despite the fact that alcohol was illegal and the punishment was death. He took his anger out on anyone who came near, sending dead bodies out of the palace on a daily basis. He murdered concubines, slept with nuns, and his younger sister. When his father learned of some of Sado's misdeeds, he summoned him to court and locked him in a giant chest, where after 8 days on the 12th of July 1762, aged 27, he was dead.